What's going on, my creative collective? Welcome to your creative unconscious reading for today. So this is Saturday, October 29th. I have been kind of MIA a little bit, just dealing with some life stuff as it happens, doing some apartment hunting and all of that jazz. So, and I feel like I could write a small book about that alone. Honestly, it's been entertaining and amusing. So nonetheless, we're gonna hop in here. Like I said, it's been a while, so let's see where the cards take us. There hasn't really been any theme. I'm hearing the word renewal, so that could be a theme that comes out. But we'll see what spirit dictates and deigns important. Divine discernment. Oh, all of them, just super casually. Lots to say. Divine discernment. Step back to find clarity. Okay. We also have the thin veil, which I had this vibe that Halloween this year is kind of like that. Like, I know that that's really like Samhain in general, in terms of pagan and like witch tradition, like witchy rituals and things like that. Though that sounds so diminutive. Let's just say Samhain, 111 on the time. So I feel like that, like I had this vibe on the 31st of the veil being thin and like using that energy to our benefit. So X marks the spot. See the love in disguise is another one here. Be reborn daily. I've literally never pulled this card for a reading, so that's beautiful. Be reborn daily. Let go of the past and breathe in your new incarnation. I feel like that's kind of like renewal, like Scorpio season in general. Like I've said before that the death card in tarot is one of my favorites because of that, for that purpose, right? Dream sanctuary, attend to the simple things. So I almost get that there's like a lot happening here. Like it's almost like a shedding, which is, again, typified by Scorpio season. Like that's sort of, I want to say a little bit of the norm for what we might experience energetically and just what's happening in nature right now. So there's an aspect of that, but I feel like there's a call to be reborn daily. And what I'm finding, even just personally, right, that, being reborn daily isn't about just, making new choices. This is about a going within. That's hence the position of the figure in the card, right? Being reborn daily is not just about doing something slightly different, right? It's also about recognizing the thin veil, knowing where you want to go. X marks the spot, right? And then allowing these dreams to fuel you in a way that moves you forward, right? Because action doesn't, like, we don't have to do all the action overnight. I'm going to pull a card from the Secret Language of Light deck because this was, I only intended for one card, but a lot of them came out. It does tell a cohesive story though, so I'm not, it's pretty much whatever spirit dictates, right? So, soul name, this one came out too. Soul name and soul mating. The way I'm seeing it here is almost this. It's like, it could be where you are. Like there needs to be a certain stillness and a going within. There's soul name and soul mating, right? Like it's like there's a stillness in this sort of temple. I feel like this is representative of some angelic protection with you. But it's like going into a sort of, and the inner temple, I know can have so many different connotations, but I think there's a wisdom and a higher, like, remembering your soul name. I did a meditation for that once. I can't remember with whom it was, but I got acquainted with that and I was like, this name doesn't make any sense. And then I looked it up and I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, so it's almost like it is not remembering your soul name, nor is it remembering your calling. Because the thing that I'm seeing here is that purpose has a place, but I feel as though you need to remember the place within you so that your purpose comes as a byproduct of where you are, as opposed to, and this is something that I've been kind of diving into as well. Hay House puts out these events that you can sign up for with authors who are releasing books or things like that, and some who have already released books. Like it's great content, and I fully believe in what they're doing. There's no sponsorship here. It's just I really believe in what they do. Lord knows they've helped me get through so many different things with different authors and things like that. So highly recommend it. But the one recently was talking about content from Robert Holden's new book, Higher Purpose, and talking about purpose meets you where you are. Like it's not something that you necessarily have to go seeking. It's just, it emerges from a sort of consistent presence, a consistency of presence. And I feel like that might be a little bit of what's happening here, right? Divine discernment. We don't discern. It's not an activity. It's a receptivity. It's a listening, right? Discernment is not what we do with the wisdom we gain. Discernment is the process of getting quiet and listening. And perhaps there is something to a soul name. Like you might be remembering a little bit of who you are. And soul mating, it's really interesting that this is in the singular. This could represent relationship, but I feel like this is coming into a depth of relationship with you, yourself, your own wisdom. And these can represent the higher chakras as well. But it's like all of these are connecting together. So to me, it's saying a lot about a bit of remembering who you are and remembering not when things were different or easier, because that's not the purpose of life, right? It gets hard, and there's a quote that says something along the lines of like, life is hard and then it's wonderful and then it's awful again and then it's, great. And that's sort of the cyclical nature of things, right? It's one of the reasons why I love fall so much, is because we're reminded of our emplacement, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm in Southern Ontario, so we're reminded of our emplacement in a system that shifts and changes and cycles through and moves, right? It's a movement. So it's just remembering the movement of wisdom around you, but through you, where you are, right? How would you feel if you knew that you didn't have to be anywhere other than where you are, right? That idea. Yeah. Oh, you want this one? Okay. So let's see where this takes us today for this reading. Spirit, what messages do you have for my creative unconscious collective? 5 of Wands and the 5 of Pentacles, 2 5s. Some change. I think 5s do represent change. 5 and 8, different variations of it. 5 of Wands, 5 of Pentacles, the Hierophant, 7 of Swords, King of Swords. Very interesting. Honestly, I'm thinking that creatively speaking, there's just been a lot of stuff that's blocking you. Like this represents kind of where you are right now. And this is coming across as blocks, like internal blocks, but also perhaps some external conflict that's been, I want to say like stymieing motion forward. It's sort of, I don't want to say it's like getting in the way, but I think it's because, when we think of obstacles, we can often go into a victim mode where we're like, well, that's happening to me. No, these obstacles are in the way, presenting you opportunities to move through and shift things within you. And some people might, have issues with that. But I mean, realistically, like, to me, it's not about the obstacles outside of you defining you. And sometimes obstacles come and you're like, how the hell did this even, right? Like or you're like, that escalated quickly, those types of things. And the idea here is not to be so wrapped up in the conflict that surrounds you and to see it as an obstacle, but to ask consistently, what's the lesson here? What's the thing that I can take from this so that I can be done with this pattern, so that I can move past the repetition of these themes, so that it's less variation of a theme and more, new ground that I'm breaking. And I think there's something to do with this sense of yourself as a resource, right? This is a lack of resources. This is a very pointed lack of resources. And I think where you are is reminding you of the opposite of where you are, right? It's contrast. It's Abraham Hicks. So it's like you're reminded of the contrast. So you're reminded that where you are, so this is the title of a book. I think I've talked about it on the channel before, but the book is called Where You Are Is Not Who You Are. And, where you experience this contrast, this 5 of Pentacles, whether it be with a creative project or in relationship or whatever else, you're invited into a space within that sees beyond where you are, that sees possibility, and I've said this before too, but these figures in the card, all they have to do is look up and attune their perspective to the open doors around them. Because if they're constantly looking down, they're going to realize they're going to feel like they're more alone or in the cold than ever before. But if they look up at the other doors, they will see that there are possibilities. They may not be ones that they even want, but they're possibilities that exist. And when they focus on those opportunities, then they can see another way. And I feel like that other way may be this sort of conflict, right? The other way, the things in the way, I can't remember who that book is by. What's in the way is the way, something along those lines. But yeah, so I'm really feeling like this is it's kind of again, it's that call to go within, right? And it's almost like that's where this conflict then becomes a kind of training, though, depending on how you alchemize it, depending on how you use it, depending on how you learn the lessons of what it's presenting to you, and I think that's sort of this point of where you are, and you're here to embrace, I think, this higher wisdom. This also comes across as higher unlearning, right? Higher unlearning, because you're unlearning, I want to say, because you're releasing the Seven of Swords energy, you're unlearning ways of getting by, because you're coming out here, like how the light gets in is this King of Swords energy. This is divine discernment, but there's also so much more to this, right? This is transformation too. The butterflies on the throne, like there's, and it's amazing. What I love about the King of Swords is that there's a knowledge that gets things done on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's just this depth of knowing through experience. The king doesn't wield that sword because it wasn't inherited. This is one that is more hard won, in my opinion. In other decks I've seen in the Chris Ann deck, you can see at the top of the mountain, the king got there to the top of the mountain, right? There of some volition. So, it is not without effort. And I think what you're seeing is this higher unlearning where there's a lot of divine wisdom coming through. And the divine wisdom isn't just, it's not just for the sake of itself. This is also Taurian energy. So it could also be related to the Scorpio-Taurus eclipse. Like this could be eclipse season and you're embracing change. You're embracing transformation. Which is good. It's a good way to use this energy because the energy is going to be there regardless, right? 11:11 on the time. The energy is going to be there regardless. So if we can use it in service to our growth and bettering ourselves, why wouldn't we, right? Why wouldn't we? So I think what you're releasing big time here, the Seven of Swords, is releasing, I think, patterns that left you feeling like you had to either receive less or take what, and patterns, I think, more mental patterns and constructs. I almost see this too as like taking impulsive action, because this Two of Swords is what's left behind, and the Five is what's going, which is conflict. Five of Swords, right? That's sort of a little bit of manipulative energy and some imposter syndrome, like winning at all costs, right? So it's like that mentality has kind of crept in, and it's almost looking at the Two Swords because it's like avoiding the feeling of indecision, which is represented by the Two of Swords. So it's like pulling back and seeing that there's a different way of doing things, and maybe even thinking about yourself and seeing yourself because of the way that the cards are showing up here, right? The Seven of Swords is looking at the King of Swords. You're releasing the energy of that and understanding who you are. You're understanding far better who you are. And I think that is really the gift of the conflict, the gift of the Five of Wands and the Five of Pentacles. It's like integrating a Ten of Swords where the pain was not without purpose, and you're understanding that it didn't have to have a purpose, but you're giving it a purpose so that you can use it for your best and highest good. Spirit, can you clarify this Five of Wands and Five of Pentacles for me? Two of Swords. Yeah, this is the indecision, right? And this also may be where you feel like you don't have all the answers. So it makes you feel compelled. You don't have to dive into that, but it's a compelled to behave in ways that would come from a place of feeling like you don't have the answers. When you do, you do. This could just be that you don't have all of the answers that would provide the one that you hope or want most. But this doesn't mean you don't have answers. This doesn't mean you don't have options. This isn't for lack of choice. This is for lack of reflection, which is also needing to go within more, right? That stillness energy. Spirit, can you tell me a little bit more about this kind of stillness and going within? Ooh, this kind of flew out and then back in, which is for sure that's a big mood. Saturn is a mood, is it not? Not like a crusty bastard mood, but like, I feel like that feels like a lesson here. Like this feels like a Saturn lesson. It's a disciplined teacher. It's like the way I look at it is parenting. Like Saturn is like a loving parent that provides boundaries around which we understand ourselves and what we're capable of. But in turn too, and the wheel just popped out. These are Saturn and Jupiter can be some of our best friends, planetarily speaking. They can be some of our best friends because where Saturn, we think of it as a contraction. We think of it as boundaries. We think of it as restriction. What we forget is that we remember who we are in that process. So I think about parents imposing boundaries, and imposing is very loose, but on children and saying what they can and cannot do for specific reasons. those same boundaries that we learn from parents through loving discipline then become the rules of engagement and the terms of engagement with which we engage the world and our peers, parents, parents later, then, partners, all of that stuff. So all of these things that we learn about who we are, we can then integrate that and take that with us further. And I feel like the wheel is here to remind you that there's always something there to remind me. I don't know why. I wasn't listening to that song at all recently, but and these are also fixed signs. So I think this could be about a sort of being more consistent with yourself and showing up for yourself consistently. I think about fixed signs in that way. It's not so much about like stubbornness, although, Taurus often gets that unfortunate reputation because I feel like it's not even stubbornness. The Taurians that I know, I mean, as an Aquarius, I do sometimes know that I can out-stubborn people, but it's not about the fixed signness to it, right? It's not about that per se. I think the energy here is more so being consistent with yourself. Saturn, it would invite you to show up for yourself in a more consistent and regular way because without that, it's really hard to expand because you don't trust yourself. You don't trust yourself, so you don't trust life. So what does trust mean? How do you build that? And it's a muscle. It's a muscle that you have to develop and cultivate with yourself. Right? It really is. Yeah. And I think of the Two of Wands as like, people think of it as a planning card or an expectation, but I almost see it as like what you do when you don't trust yourself, what you do when you're outside of integrity with yourself, when you're outside of this Ace of Swords that the King of Swords holds, right? Like when you're outside of that, you're always looking externally where, you have the whole world in your hands. You have and I guess that's a little bit colonial, but nonetheless, like you have all of these different ways of doing things and different options available, but the focus is so limited to the external. And that's where it's like the call it's calling you back home. Yes. But the call is to go more within. And I feel like that's where it's like becoming a good student of what's most important to you, becoming a good student of your inner values. Your inner values, I should say, all values are inner, but the way that they manifest inwardly or they show up inwardly through your emotions that then allows you to put it into the world, right? And I think it's, the wheel is also about change, and I feel like there's an abundance of change. And when you feel like there's an abundance of change, you can sometimes feel like you have a lack of resources, right? But the reality is not a lack of resources. The reality is when an abundance of change happens, there's also an abundance of resources, but you can get caught up in the rush and the stream of that and feel a bit like you don't have what it takes or like you don't have the resources. And I feel very interesting here that the wheel and the world are bookended by the Two of Swords and the Two of Wands, right? An internal and external facing card, right? So what you need to do, I think, is come back into balance with these processes, right? External facing would be, I'm going to look up the answers to these things. Internal facing would be, I'm going to ask questions of spirit and my guides as to what this means. For example, I went and looked at an apartment and it was, the price was right. And I was like, this feels way off though. So I looked it up and there's apparently a whole Reddit thread about the apartment and the landowner and different ways that they've not been great to tenants. Holy, right? If I had, 1818 was just in the time. If I had signed that lease, that would have, locked me in. But I said, before I went to sleep, I said, Spirit, just show me and help me to understand in the marrow of my bones if this is the right place for me. And I woke up and I woke up and the apartment had kind of smelled strongly of cigarettes when you walked in. And that to me is like, I can't, I have nothing, I have friends who smoke and it's not a judgment against them. It just causes headaches for me. So I can't, that's not a thing that I do. And I'm very sensitive to cigarette smoke, right? So that I woke up smelling that and I was like, thank you, Spirit. And it's just those little things, right? That might be a deal breaker for some. But I didn't know if it was because someone had been smoking just outside the door. So the smell was inside, right? There's a whole bunch of variables, but right. So all of these things. And then gradually I was like, why don't I just Google this? So I looked it up and it was like very plainly right there. Right. So it's about understanding those things too. Yeah. And I think it's like putting an end to the right things so that the wrong things can make their exit. and like a for good this time. And I think what you need to do is just be a student of your own inner landscape. Be a student of your inner world, because that, I think, is not just, that's the opportunity. That's the door opener, right? Where you think that there are no doors. When you become a student of your inner landscape, it means that you're also listening. So instead of seeing the externals, you're seeing the internals here. And, I think it's adjacent to Saturn for a reason. It may be scary to go within, because you may have been hanging on to emotions and situations for a long time that you didn't feel. So when you purge those things, and when you go through that emotional purging, sometimes those emotions need to come out first, right? It's almost like a pop bottle that's been like shaken up and just left to sit. It's like it. So that initial opening of that bottle will be more significant, not only in sound, but in possible mess. So you just have to let it overflow, because eventually it does calm down, right? It's like that sort of arc of, emotions when it comes to conflict resolution. Like there's going to be an arc, and once it hits the top of the arc, it has nowhere to go but back down to a place of regulation. So I think this is also, it's understanding your own flow as well, right? It's understanding your own flow. So Spirit, can you clarify the Hierophant card here? And I think when this is relative to creative stuff too, this isn't just about like, this happens creatively and this is what it means for creative projects. I think that who you are is changing in terms of how you show up. It's like how you show up, and what that's doing is changing by giving you more opportunities that you didn't see, because the opportunities have existed the whole time, right? That's where this Page of Pentacles is also it's like an internal facing process. And then it turns outward, where you begin to see not just what's not meant for you, but you see it differently, because opportunities that you would not have even gone for before, you would not have even seen as feasible, now have hit the realm of possible, because you know that it's not a challenge that you're up for, it's a worthiness that you contain within you, right? It's a worthiness that you contain within you. Yeah, the Hierophant, 5 of Wands. It could be unlearning, it's also, I think this is a little bit of like the higher unlearning piece is coming in here with the Hierophant, where it's an aspect of befriending the part of you that maybe conflict was the way, like, there's something about conflict being like a way, or, maybe conflict had surrounded you and there's a more peaceful way, but you have to unlearn the emotional ties to conflict first. Like you might have to unlearn those things. Temperance, yeah, it's coming back into balance. I think you've had a lot of patience with this process and yourself. The Taurian energy is earth energy, and it's very grounded, but I'm seeing scorched earth. Maybe you had to do some of that, right? I don't advocate for discarding people, because I feel like it's not a good energy. And, there are times, the Instagram page, The Black Sheep Survives, I think is a great page. Just in my own healing process, I still follow that page, but they talk about, like a lot of dysfunctional family habits and things that we can carry over into our relationships. And it sometimes you need it said in that way, very plainly, not just to see the pattern that you have experienced familially or in friendship or otherwise, but then also to see, oh, that feels uncomfortable, but maybe I'm seeing some of my own shit, right? And that process, I think, is part of this unlearning. And I think that temperance can mean coming back into balance, but I'm seeing it's also a bit of patience that you've needed to have with this process. And,
eventually, again, that arc, right? Eventually there's a regulation period that comes back.
And it's like asking yourself, why? Why did I feel like the hard way was the best way?
Because I feel like the 5 of Wands can represent conflict, but it can also represent training, right? So it's like, what were you training for?
What were you training for specifically?
That you needed the conflict as a metric of success or a way to know yourself well.
And sometimes that happens. Like we can alchemize conflict in that way, but I feel like there's a new beginning and a new start. Like there's Ace of Swords on the bottom. Ain't that the truth? There's a new start that you're looking to have here. And even if not looking to have, then, the Fool can also represent leaps of faith. There are a lot of things that you want to do still, right? When you think about And maybe your context, maybe where you're emplaced is part of the higher unlearning, right? Your environment can shape a lot. Like your environment can sometimes reinforce old beliefs. That's where you have to ask yourself, why am I here still? What is the lesson here that I've not learned yet? Because when something starts to feel more intolerable than tolerable, or feel really uncomfortable, you've got to move. And you can move your mind. So this is a variation of a Maya Angelou quote, but the idea is that, if you can't change your circumstances, you've got to change yourself, because that's the only thing you're in control of. And it's sometimes easier said than done. Sometimes things feel absolutely impossible. Like you're being squished in a box of a room that's just closing faster and faster and faster, right? There is always something that will shift. And sometimes the discomfort is there to teach you a lesson. And I can say, with experience, that there are lessons that I've learned that I will never need to learn again. Because when you learn them, oh, do you ever, right? So it affords you a luxury of being done with that particular lesson. And the person that you become after that, ooh, brilliant, radiant even, right? It may not feel like it at first, but this almost feels like a rebirth. Like the higher unlearning takes place, and that's where the Fool energy is feeling like this rebirth energy. Could be the aspect. I think Aliza Kelly was talking about this on her Instagram the other day in terms of, and also I don't even understand why Instagram took down her video for mentioning death. Like what? That was so. Anyways, but she talked about the Scorpio and Taurus axis as, Scorpio represents the opposite of life, and then Taurus represents more spring energy, and that could be this spring-like energy after this sort of, I want to say this shedding, this like leaving behind, right? It's almost like stepping into a new reality, but the reality hasn't really changed that much. It's that you have jumped a timeline of sorts because of the way that you're saying no more to this, yes to this, no to this, and there's clarity, right? There's clarity. So I think that you're deeply connected to your truths right now, and I think that when you're in that process of unlearning, your truths are so obvious that the rebirth is almost impossible. Well, that's a double negative, but you can't avoid it. Right? So I feel like there's a big rebirth happening here, specifically the number 2 of the major arcana coming out, 555 as well, up against the Saturn energy here, Saturnian and Jupiter energy. Like there's a lot of change, and I think, I think it's good change. I don't think it's been particularly easy, especially when you reflect on when you release energies of the 7 of Swords, right? And you come back into balance, 6 of Pentacles. When you release this energy of the 7 of Swords, what can start to happen is you see yourself very clearly. And if it doesn't feel good, you can then use this energy and turn it inwardly so that you then get into imposter syndrome and start to steal from yourself. You steal your energy by comparison. You take from you, right? So that your cup is impossible to fill. And I think that this is like making sure that you release the energy truly, and you don't just, instead of external behaviors, you don't just turn them inwardly because you feel that's what you deserve now. You do not. There is no cosmic penance that you have to pay, right? We have to let go of this idea of punishment being the metric by which we discern whether people deserve a good life. Like, there are certain circumstances where I believe that there's differences to that, where like, bodily harm and things like that are caused. Like there's restoration and restorative justice that needs to take place. But I'm talking here in most basic terms. Okay. So this to me is about, it's not just about letting go. It's releasing guilt, releasing shame. Like if things don't work out, why do you need to take a list of the reasons why it didn't work out and then use that to berate yourself over and over, right? And then you get into a different kind of cycle and you haven't learned the lesson. You haven't learned the Saturn lesson. You're just taking the pattern that might have been externally facing and turning it inward out of super duper self-hatred. So are you really growing? Do you really grow from that? Because that's not necessarily growth. That's just misplaced. That's like, it's sort of like a magic trick where you put the ping pong ball under the cup and then you shift it around and you're like, ta-da, right? You haven't gotten rid of the ping pong ball and you've ceased to engage in loving yourself and seeing self-love as anything other than a game. So it's where the energy can get complicated. Ping pong balls in a cup.
Yeah, maybe that's kind of what you were doing to yourself, right? Like there's a way that the energy was like, look here, look here. And it's almost like you're doing this. It's like magic tricks to keep yourself distracted. Sometimes you just got to sit with the feeling of shame, the worry. You've got to sit with it. And not because that itself. What I find very interesting is that sometimes we can fear that sitting with these feelings are, it's like we're punishing ourselves. We're repeating a pattern. But usually sitting with the feeling teaches you the way through it. Usually sitting with the pattern helps you to move away from it as opposed to sitting within it, right? And that, it's like the movement forward, Cancerian energy. Yeah, it's like moving away from that. And this is also a bit of an integrated heart space as well. This energy is not one of conflict. It's decided action. It's not just concerted effort. I almost see the Chariot as not needing that much effort at all, because once you know, you just know, and it doesn't feel like that much effort. Certainly there is effort that goes into moving the Chariot, but it's a different kind of effort. What moves your heart space now, or has the potential to move your heart space now, where it comes to work, relationship, whatever, it's slightly different, because I feel like there's a cycle that you've really brought to an end, and like a striking end, right? And this is the part of you that's being reborn. And I think that this is where it's almost like I'm thinking in opposites, and I don't like thinking in binaries, but like I'm thinking of the binary of the Five of Pentacles, and then what's its opposite? The Five of Wands, what's its opposite, right? That's what's kind of coming to mind. So we could be thinking in opposites here, but with the Seven of Cups, what this strikes me as is the opposite of this could be seeing an abundance of ways that you're loved and supported. For every way that you may have seen yourself as worthy of punishment or shame or guilt, it's like seeing something completely different, seeing something about you to love, right? And then these Nine of Swords, it's like they turn into something else, right? You can then take them off the wall as different things to pin your worries to. And that allows your heart center so much space. This is the expanse of your heart center post transformation of that energy. And if this is related to a project specifically, what this can mean is that instead of looking for things to worry about, instead of seeing all of the things that could go wrong, you're not just looking to the things that could go right. You're following your heart in that if this feels right, I know I can handle it. And that's a different kind of energy, because the worry, you're not saying get rid of the worry first and then the good will come. No, that's not productive either, because the worry may be there. If you have a habit of worrying, if the worry in your life has been carved into the marrow of your heart, like a Grand Canyon, because of patterns and things that were legitimately needed for survival when you were younger, that's not going to go away overnight. So don't punish yourself for that, right? This is about moving forward from your heart center and knowing that you can handle it. The King of Swords here is a reminder to say, yes, you can, right? The King of Swords is a card of yes, I can. Yes, I will. Yes, I am, right? Knight of Wands, yeah. This is more momentum energy than anything. I don't think this is impulses per se. I think that, if there's anything to release, it's releasing impulsivity, because there's a different kind of momentum that's available to you. Your fire can be used differently now, right? This may have been the way that you went from project to project or place to place. But I feel like this is more about the Chariot energy, where it's decisive action, right? You're coming from a kingdom and a castle. You come from a specific place, right? Not to say that the Knight of Wands does not, but the Knight of Wands does also not bear the accoutrement of coming from a very specific place. It just doesn't, right? It doesn't. Which can be a good thing, but that's also part of its temporality, like the temporariness of it. So I think that the Chariot is a bit more, I know that Cancer is a cardinal sign, but I think cardinal, ooh, I'm having a blank. But anyways, it's not, what I'm seeing is just an energy of not needing to be so caught in feeling like you have to get somewhere fast, because the Chariot is fast moving energy, but it's totally different, right? It's connected to the bigger picture, to a bigger part of you. The King of Swords and Death, there's the transformation. Yeah, I love this. And the Hermit. The Devil, Three of Swords. Okay, that's too much noise.
Five of Pentacles. I feel like this is the transformation. You're seeing that this is where you were externally facing, right? What is the opposite of the Five of Pentacles? Thank you, Spirit. The freaking Hermit, right? Who would have thought? You'd be like, well, let's do a little check here, and we'll see a trick here, I guess. I don't know, but like, what's the opposite of it? The Hermit. That's wisdom. That's knowing the difference. You look to the buildings around you, to the places around you, to the externals for the light, but you forget that you are the light. Right? You forget that that is within you. This is also some Virgo energy. It could have been something that kicked off during Virgo season. But again, Scorpio season is represented here in the Death card too. But I feel like that's that transformative energy and the energy of the butterfly on the throne here, right? Of the King of Swords. Sometimes the Five of Pentacles can feel really comfortable, right? It can feel really comfortable because if you're not used to advocating for yourself and what you want and taking up space and saying, this is what I am going to do. My voice matters. What I want matters. I don't have to just be busy with other people's crap. I mean, sometimes it's nice, and I'm not talking about the compassionate ways we can be there for one another. I'm talking about the ways that we can engage with people in patterns that frustrates our energy so that we have so little left for ourselves. Right. And then for the rest of life too, right? Like that's part of what has gone. But sometimes the Five of Pentacles, it can feel comfortable, ironically enough, because it means you're always moving towards something. And I don't know about you, but in this part of my life, I'm prioritizing peace. Like, yeah, I have ADHD and like I can, run with the best of them, but it's not like that anymore. When I was in my 20s, and even I would say in my early 30s, I'm in my mid 30s now, but even in my early 30s, there was something to be said for the comfort of busy. And there's something now to be said for the comfort of peace and consistency in that, right? And knowing that you can have all of these things happening around you, but there's a sense of, let me show you what peace looks like, right? But I feel like that's, yeah. And this is where it's like, the Magician, I feel like, is the thing you don't see coming is this part of yourself as like the true alchemist. This is you not just manifesting things for the sake of themselves. It's you letting go of things that weren't working, being good on your own. I think it's going to surprise other people. There's a tower here, but I think it's you being very clear. No longer are you carrying the burdens of codependency and emotional manipulation because you can stand on your own. You don't need that stuff. You don't need that. So it's almost like clearing the communication path for something much clearer, because this is Gemini energy, right? Which is Mercury, Virgo and Mercury too. So very much so. But I feel like this energy is coming through to say that whatever it is that you've been working on, like whatever part of yourself, it's clearing a path for something much broader and more expansive. And for you to not just know yourself more deeply, but to know your why more deeply, to love yourself more fully. And this isn't, we can sometimes singularize our goals into like relationship and otherwise, but you are a whole thing unto yourself. And when you realize the depth of that and what that means when you're in relationship with someone and what you bring to the table when it comes to jobs or creative projects or whatever you're working on, it changes what you start to magnetize to you, right? I mean, I think about that apartment, for example. It was under 1,000, which is kind of a good deal to an extent, but there were all these little things, right? And then you think to yourself, well, I'm actually worthy of that. And what I said to myself initially was, that landlord's really doing people a favor, eh? And then I thought to myself, why the hell am I getting into that pattern? I gave up that relationship pattern for Lent. So, I mean, like years ago. So why am I looking at a landlord relationship where I'm going to be paying someone for that, right? Like, it's like these different ways the patterns can get in. But when you start to see it that differently, right? When you start to see that differently, you're like, whoa, this is an old pattern knocking. No, thank you. I say that just as a small example because it's one that happened very recently. But it's like a moment where patterns might come up, right? That's the Seven of Swords and the Seven of Cups. They might come up, they might pop up, but what you do with them makes the difference. Do you worry about them? Do you say like, oh no, there's another pattern that's coming up when I thought I hadn't dealt with this? Sometimes they're going to come up. It's fine, right? But it's what you do with them and how you articulate your why through them. And again, when you realize that you're a whole thing on your own, and that you do bring a lot to the table, be it in whatever form of your life, you stop settling for breadcrumbs. And I feel like Five of Pentacles represents that breadcrumb. And I think that in some ways you might have been breadcrumbing yourself with a perspective too, where you were breadcrumbing yourself and saying, well, I have to do all this extra work. And trust me, like as a, when I was in school, so when I was doing grad school, I felt like this intense imposter syndrome, Seven of Swords, right? Like intense. I felt like I didn't belong there. I was like, I had to leave my undergrad because I had nearly been murdered. And so, I mean, that and other things too, but it was like, it came together in a way that prevented me from finishing. And that was my BA. Then getting into a master's program, I thought to myself, you know what? There's a lot of different things I don't know. So I would spend hours, and I mean hours, at the library at my school, trying to prove something, right? I mean, I loved the theory anyway, but I worked twice as hard as other people, sometimes 3 to 4 times as hard, because I felt like I didn't belong there, right? My socioeconomic status was not at all what many of my classmates was or were, right? And in some ways, it's like you feel like you have to work twice as hard, 5 times, what people are doing, whatever, backwards, sideways, upside down. And you have to know things about other people's jobs just to do yours, because you get into a place where you feel like that's just how you function, right? And I say that as like, a queer, trans, neurodivergent person with CPTSD, right? And, having come from a background where we were raised in poverty, like that, those things don't necessarily leave you, but you get to decide what you do with them. You get to decide what you make of yourself through them and because of them, because you are a whole person. You are a whole good thing being brought to a table. And so when that's the case, it's not a question of why are the external circumstances not lining up, because that's going to happen a lot, right? As a trans person, that's just how it is right now. And, I can be frustrated at the circumstances of people, messing up pronouns or things like that. I can be frustrated with those circumstances, or I can see those things as different than a source of frustration. And some people might debate me on this, and I'm not saying don't ask to be respected, because that's important. But this is more so about how you're using what's happening to you. What's the in service to the higher that it's being placed into? Because bad things are going to happen to all of us. That's just the nature of life, right? Bad things will happen, but what we do with them is what matters. 4141 on the time. This is a long reading. It's good to be back. But I think you're getting clearer with how you communicate with yourself. And I think that you're clearly communicating your worth and your value to other people. That's what this last, like King of Swords, Death, Five of Pentacles, Hermit, Magician. That's telling me that there's this outward movement where you're starting to say, no, I know my worth. So do not come to my court, so to speak, lest you come with an understanding of that worth, right? And accepting nothing less for yourself or from yourself, because that's the other part too, where we can look outside of ourselves and say, people have to live up to this standard now, but then you treat yourself like shit, right? So it's like lining those things up as well. And allowing them to align too, right? And again, very communicative energy with Mercury here. It's like communicating those energies with yourself, but like I'm thinking self-talk and like beliefs that you have, not just affirmations for the sake of themselves either, but affirmations for the point of, yes, this is something that I understand about myself, and I'm not going to put myself into situations anymore where I have to call upon these parts of me for survival. I get to call upon these parts of me for thriving. I get to call upon these parts of me for my best and highest expression, not for the bare bottom survival, right? And that's the difference. I think that's sort of the shift here. And maybe that's a movie you would want to watch, The Shift by Wayne Dyer, who knows? But I think it's about going within right now. And going within means different things to different people, right? I've talked about this before, where for me, meditation isn't just about, this is like way back on the channel, but I talked about how meditation can be going on a hike. Meditation can be listening to music. Meditation can be a whole bunch of other things. It's not just the one piece, right?
and having ADHD, I talk about it a lot, and I don't tend to limit my perspective of myself through it. I just understand how my brain works. So don't let labels like that limit who you are, right? For me, running can be a meditation. I find listening to music and going on hikes outside is a deep meditation, especially if there are others around. It sort of limits the sensory input. And music can help to focus your sensory input as well, right? So it doesn't feel as overwhelming if you're outside and there's so much happening and you're taking so much in. But meditating can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes we can feel meditative just by reading, or we can make mindful eating practices, right? That to me is... That to me, it can mean anything, but I think there's a point of going within and having conversations with yourself and engaging with your intuitive, receptors, as well as they can take in information, but how well are we listening to that? 4444 on the time, definitely connected to angelic guidance and protection here. But I will leave it here. I'm going to pull a card from the Notes from the Universe on Love and Connection by Mike Dooley. Let's go, Spirit. What have you got for me? What have you got for my creative collective? Things are not as they appear. Maybe they're better, right? The lower the price of your love, the higher its value. Brain freeze, the universe. But things are not as they appear. What if they're better than what they appear, right? Are you limiting the good the universe can do through the lens of your highest good, perceptive only? Through the lens of what's happening right now? Are we going to limit the good that Spirit can do? I let go of the shadow of the past by seeing someone for the first time with the eyes of love. I let go of the shadow of the past by seeing someone for the first time with the eyes of love. Yeah. And I think this is also about things are not as they appear. Yeah, it's like seeing things through the eyes of the person you are now, or the person that you're becoming, not through the eyes of the things that have limited you in the past. And, that just came flying out. When I'm tuned into the energy of abundance, I become abundant. I feel like that was a little bit of a call-in for me from Spirit. Thank you. But I'm going to pull from the Miracles Now deck, and that will close out this reading. Spirit, do you have any final messages for my creative collective? Creative unconscious. There we go. Sounds like a plan. Happiness is a choice I make, and I surrender it all. I love these messages. Happiness is a choice I make. Sometimes it's not easy. When things are not going well, or you feel like they're not going right, are they going wrong, or is it just another twist and turn, right? I think about I go back to that apartment example, and I could have easily been like, oh, this is never going to work. And even then I looked at apartments and I fell in love with them, and there was a great one, and the person was like, oh, it's already taken, less than 8 hours later. And now I'm laughing about it, but at the time I was like, oh, really? But what if there's obviously a better one waiting for me, just perfect for me? So all of that to say, happiness is a choice you make, right? And surrender it all. Don't be afraid to feel your way through things and then let them go. And the letting go is the important part, right? Divine discernment. Step back to find clarity. So I will leave it here, my darlings. I hope this resonated. If it did, give it a like and subscribe. I'd love to have you on the channel if you're not already. But if you are joining me for my subscriber base, thank you very much. I really appreciate you. And as always, wherever this finds you on the time-space continuum, morning, afternoon, or night, I hope it finds you very, very well, my friends. Take care.